Oscar Wilde once said, "When I was young, I thought that money was the most important thing in life. Now that I am old, I know that it is." While I only agree with this about halfway, what I do know is that 2024 is right around the corner, and it's going to present one of the biggest life-changing opportunities for people in general. And we know that unfortunately, because the way things are, money controls just about everything. It determines sometimes partner selection, it determines people's ability to purchase consumables, it determines people's ability to purchase non-consumables and luxury items. Sometimes is the root cause of war. It's a lot of things. Money is a very big deal. Next year is an opportunity that I think many people do not want to miss. Assets like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Filecoin, Chainlink, Polygon are going to be huge players in my opinion, and part of my portfolio for the upcoming 6 months. We're going to take a look at things today and how to prepare for it. Before we get started, thank you for coming back to the Sovereign Ratio. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button, the like button, leave me a comment below on your thoughts on everything we're going to talk about today, and understand that none of this is financial advice. First, let's simply start with one of the most important days in all of crypto that most people know about, which is the Bitcoin halving. We've had 3 Bitcoin halvings to this point, and we have a 4th one coming up, which is estimated to be in April of 2024. Those 4 lines are marked on my TradingView graph here, and what that represents is the day that essentially the algorithm to solve, which produces Bitcoin for miners, becomes twice as difficult, thus requiring twice the amount of energy and also twice the amount of computing power in order to produce that Bitcoin. Essentially, to an extent, this makes Bitcoin a function of energy itself. While some people heavily criticize the fact that Bitcoin takes energy and an increasing amount of energy to produce, it does happen to be the front runner of the entire crypto space and currently does determine the direction that all other cryptocurrencies take. This is not to say, however, that all other cryptocurrencies require this sort of energy to produce, as others are produced based off of other consensus mechanisms like proof of stake, which is one technology that requires significantly less energy to produce a crypto. One such example that's popular is Cardano, which I have the chart pulled up here for, and we're going to use that as an example later on how a crypto bull market directly after a halving can impact someone's financial situation and be completely life-changing. In addition to being a function of energy, Bitcoin also has a finite supply, unlike gold, which has an infinite supply because it's infinitely discoverable as far as we know. We don't know how much is there, we don't know how much is left to find, but Bitcoin, there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. Roughly, I believe 5 million of those have already been lost or unaccounted for, leaving 16 million behind, while 19,510,000 have already been mined, making Bitcoin very scarce because the last Bitcoin won't be mined until the year 2140. And by that time, it will be an entire 4-year cycle to only produce half of a Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is functionally programmed to escalate in value over time. Another thing Bitcoin has going for it and why it's such a strong mover of the entire crypto market is that it's the oldest crypto. It's, in my opinion, probably the most successful crypto as well, depending on what stance you're looking at, and it's also the most recognized crypto. There's a lot of people that don't even own Bitcoin that know the name Bitcoin and at least have a general idea of what it is, whether they call it fake, magic, internet money, or whatever they call it. They at least know that its prominence is increasing, especially as government agencies are simply unable to respond to whether it's a security or a commodity, even though most people and most experts agree that it is a commodity. Because Bitcoin is such a dominant force in the crypto market and does hold the majority of the entire cryptocurrency market cap as a whole, it has a huge influence on the price of other cryptocurrencies of the 20 or 30,000 that exist. Many of them will run up significantly more than Bitcoin does in a bull run, simply because it's a higher risk to reward ratio on these tokens and not as many people hold them. The summation of these coins is shown here on this total 3 chart, which has a massive run up, at least in the last bull run that we saw in 2021, ending in November 2021. That has since retraced significantly down, and currently we're waiting to see resolution on Bitcoin before potentially seeing how far total 3 can move up in the next bull run. As we can see here, total 3 ran up approximately 4,050% or 40x from the bottom of the last bear market to the top of the previous bull market. In that same amount of time, Bitcoin rose approximately 1,650% or 16x, which is a little under half of what the total 3 market cap did. That total 3 market cap also includes all altcoins, especially the ones that are extremely risky that produce thousands and thousands and thousands of percentage gains. Whereas 40x is great. It's just a total summary of all of those altcoins together, not their individual performance. The moral of the story is that the safest time to get into cryptocurrency is just before or just after the Bitcoin halving. All of the historical data has shown this, and you can see just based off of the last halving here in May of 2020, whether you bought at the top of this right before the halving or right here before the halving as well at the flu dump, or even if you bought right after the halving, it doesn't really matter. The gains were exponential. Would you have had more gains down here on this dump by the flu dump? Yeah, absolutely. If you would have bought here though, you still would have had significant gains. Let's say if you bought in here right after the halving, you could have still achieved a maximum of a 6x on Bitcoin, which I don't know many people that don't want to get 6 times their money. But the maximum potential that we discussed earlier, if you had $1 in Bitcoin, the maximum potential in the last bull run would have been $16 at the end of it. Versus altcoins, if you had $1 in altcoins, on average, not individually, but on average, $1 in altcoins would have yielded you $40 for every dollar that you had if you bought the bottom and sold the top, which nobody does, but that's just giving you a total potential for that cycle. Also, from a timing perspective, I think it's important to look at exactly when the previous bull run started, at least on Bitcoin for now. Looking here, I think it's pretty obvious to see that after the flu dump back here in 2020, the real first candle where things started to just get the precedent to go crazy was right here on October 5th, 2020. After that point, it was a straight upside until the first peak in April of 2021. Then we had that dump here to July, and then the second and final peak in November of 2021. But that actual candle that started everything, I would say is here on October 5th, 2020. Conversely, now we're looking at total 3 for the same information, which again tells us all altcoins except Bitcoin. The first actual candle where everything started to go crazy on altcoins was December 28th, 2020, which is a significant amount of time after Bitcoin started to run. So let's look and see how we can use this to our advantage, knowing that Bitcoin is the safest play and also knowing that we cannot time the bottom of any market very well. We can have a general idea, but to get the very bottom is almost impossible. Knowing that altcoins really started to move on December 28th, 2020, it's interesting to look at the Bitcoin chart and just pretend what would have happened had we have bought right at the halving, and what total potential could we have done between Bitcoin and altcoins to make this the best cycle that we could have made it. Well, if we look at the chart, if we had bought Bitcoin at its lowest point on the week of the halving, by the time the altcoins started to run, Bitcoin had already done a 305% gain, because the candle where the altcoin started to run is right here, December 28th. You can see Bitcoin had been running for a significant amount of time prior to the altcoins actually taking off. And again here, back on the total 3 chart, we are assuming best case scenarios. But if we had Bitcoin and we started to convert that Bitcoin into altcoins around the time that altcoins started to move, you already have a 3x from Bitcoin on whatever your initial investment was. And then around the time that altcoins really started to move, the entire market went up around 900%. Of course, we didn't get that entire 40x because it's very difficult to time the bottom, but we did get a potential 9x out of it. So if we take that into consideration, a 9x or even an 8x times a 3x from the Bitcoin that we already had, that's a 24x. So every dollar that you had in the market at that point, if you would have played it in that kind of manner, could have potentially given you a 24x, which that's not the whole 40x of the altcoin market, but it is more than the 16x or the entire Bitcoin bull market. And it's also the much safer route to go. With Bitcoin being a safe haven, whenever Bitcoin runs a little bit and you start to notice altcoins are moving with it, it's probably time to convert that to altcoins. And we know that the Bitcoin halving is the safest time to buy Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the safest asset to buy in the crypto space. So this seems like a natural progression into how to handle the next bull market. Let's hold the phone here for just a second and go back to Cardano, which I would consider to be one of the more stable projects in the crypto space. There are people that love it. There are people that hate it. I'm not particularly biased either way. I'm biased towards gains. So let's look at Cardano. Let's go back to the flu dump back in March of 2020. Which is essentially in this area here. I'm not going to get perfect numbers, but I'm going to get generalized numbers to understand what's going on. So the maximum gain for Cardano from the flu dump is approximately, to its peak in 2021, approximately 12,500%, which is a 125x. $1 for every dollar you had in Cardano, you could have potentially made $125. Again, nobody's going to time the top and the bottom perfectly, but there's also the opportunity here to capitalize on a sale in this area and then a rebuy in this area, which would take that 125% gain exponentially higher than that. But with the market being as hard to predict as it is, this is just an example. So let's go to when altcoins really started to run, which was December 28th, right here. So if we would have converted our entire Bitcoin, which again had already done a 3x. So let's say we had $100 of Bitcoin, we had already made around a 3x by buying at the halving. Now we have $300. Let's say we're going to put all $300 into Cardano, and we just happen to get it right here at the bottom of this candle. All the way to the top, that is an 1,861% gain, which is an 18x. So now our $300 can be multiplied by 18. Now our $300 is $5,400. So we took $100 of capital and generated $5,400 at the end of the bull market, potentially. We could have done more than that even if we would have sold here, bought back here, and sold here again. But in general, this shows the power of certain cryptocurrencies and the projects and the belief behind them. Whereas the entire total 3 market did a 40x, Cardano could have done an easy 50x, but it actually could have done 125x all the way from the bottom, which is substantial. I know people that put $1,000 in Cardano back around the bottom, got 125 times their money. That's, it's $125,000. Imagine if you would have put $10,000 in Cardano. That's $1.25 million. And there are many, many projects that did a very similar amount of gain in the last bull run. It's just the nature of the beast, and knowing how to play this market and knowing how it actually works on the internals when it comes to financial performance, not necessarily the technology itself, but understanding how coins trade is key to the upcoming bull market, which I believe is going to be one of probably the last opportunities to make gains of this nature in cryptocurrency. So that being said, as you've noticed by now, the thumbnail says that you're going to be a millionaire, which I hope that you are. Not everybody's going to be, not everybody that watches this video is going to be, but here's the point. If we do an average of a 25x, let's say that you play the market really well in the next bull run, you buy right around the halving in Bitcoin, convert that to altcoins at the right time. Maybe you make more, maybe you make less. But in general, if you want to be a millionaire, how much capital do I need? Well, it's pretty simple. We just take $1 million, we divide it by 25, we get $40,000. If you have $40,000 to invest in the market, I would say there's a decent chance that you could be a millionaire. If you have $20,000 and you invested in absolute crazy altcoins that happen to just go to the moon, you could still be a millionaire. But in general, what I've presented, I think, is a general safe play, at least to capitalize as much as you can. One thing that I would like to note is that Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and Web3 in general, one category is gaming that's going to produce exponential gains, in my opinion, in the next bull run. I believe it's going to be utility tokens that have a real use case and gaming tokens. And in some instances, it may not require $40,000 or $20,000 to become a millionaire if you invest in the right project. So here's a great example of that. This token's called Axie Infinity. It was one of the most popular gaming tokens in the previous bull run. It remains to be seen what it's going to do in the next bull run, but I would venture to say it's probably a one-hit wonder. That being said, if we just run a simple measurement tool on Axie Infinity from down here to where it first was available to purchase to the top of the last bull run, that's a 34,600%. That's a 346x. So in that scenario, it wouldn't require nearly as much capital to be a millionaire. In fact, an investment into Axie Infinity at the right time would have only taken around $2,800, $2,900, we'll call it $3,000 at the bottom of the last bear market to produce $1 million in the bull run, potentially, if you purchased at the bottom and bought at the top. But you can see the power of some of these tokens. When they catch a bid, they really catch a bid. And in my opinion, gaming tokens in the next bull run are going to do exactly this. I've gone over many of those gaming tokens in previous videos in the months past, and I would recommend going through my channel and watching those videos to get my thoughts on some of them. But a couple examples would be Wilder World and Gala Games and Vulcan Forge. There has been some controversy with Gala Games with lawsuits between founders, but I still do believe, regardless of whatever the outcome of that is, as long as it doesn't destroy the project, the token will still perform very well. That being said, with that lawsuit between founders, it is a little bit more risky. But I would invite you to look at other projects as well that I've covered that support the metaverse and Web3 gaming, like Render Token, which is probably another solid pick for the next bull run. Now, finally, if you're still here and you're new to crypto, I just want to say a couple of things. I know that crypto at times has had bad light cast upon it. I know that it has been a source of controversy, but what you have to understand is the psychology of people. When people want to manipulate other people, they say the opposite of what they're actually going to do. And a lot of times there's points in history in Bitcoin where it's been called dead, I think like 60, 70 times, something like that. And yet year after year, it continues to show its viability as a financial instrument of the future. And I want to make this very clear. Bitcoin is finite. We know how many there will be. There'll never be more than that. 2, let's say that you had all of your money in gold. What happens if you want to sell that gold? As Michael Saylor would say, you have to pack it up. It's heavy. You have to ship it somewhere. You have to negotiate a rate. It takes time to make the transaction happen. Bitcoin, even though it's not something physical that you hold in your hand, all of that can be done within 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be transported. It doesn't have to be, have a huge contract. It doesn't have to be weighed. None of that. It's immutable. Any transaction can be seen on the blockchain. So while a wallet address will not show a person's identity, every single transaction is freely available for anyone to see at any time. There's not a secret behind it. There's no hidden agenda. Has it been used for illicit things? Sure, every form of currency has been used for illicit things. That doesn't necessarily mean that Bitcoin has been more than anything else. In fact, I would argue that it's much easier to do illicit activities with a paper dollar that does not have a publicly available ledger for anyone in the world to view at any time. Keep that in mind. Also, if you have concerns about energy, I would invite you to do research on the energy usage of Bitcoin, because one Christmas season in the United States, the lights produce more energy than Bitcoin does in an entire year. So keep that in mind. If Bitcoin as a financial instrument is not worth a season of Christmas lights, I think there are bigger problems afoot. While we're on the topic, I think it's important to briefly gloss over some recent news in cryptocurrency. For one, it's now a political item. We have candidates like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who avidly support Bitcoin and have even proposed that if they take office, he'll create a legislation that removes all tax from Bitcoin for anyone who holds under a certain amount or transacts in under a certain amount. He's extremely pro-Bitcoin and extremely Bitcoin friendly, and is probably the first Democratic candidate that some people with a red flag would support. He's an interesting guy, and he's not currently receiving funding from big major institutions, which we know support most of the banks and control most of the banks, and to an extent, probably some politicians as well. Secondly, a number of financial institutions, including the biggest ones in the entire world, multiple of them that control almost all of the assets in the entire world to some extent, have filed for Bitcoin spot ETFs. This is probably the biggest thing that could happen to Bitcoin, and I assume when it happens, when everything gets approved, we are going to see some major market volatility. Oddly enough, the SEC approval for these spot Bitcoin ETFs, the deadline is right before the Bitcoin halving, making a further case for probably a piece of downside right before the halving, and then when this news comes out that they're approved, a massive run up to start. Additionally, all of these topics have been covered in previous videos. If you want more detail, please go to my previous videos and look at that. But also, Bitcoin now has fair value accounting, whereas previously it was stuck in gap accounting land, where its lowest value at any given point in the year is the value that it needed to be on the balance sheet. Now, under fair value accounting, Bitcoin can be accounted for at a reasonable fair value, which is generally much higher than the lowest point during that year. This gives organizations more of a chance to put Bitcoin on the balance sheet just to diversify what's actually on the balance sheet, especially organizations that know the power of this asset and the future of this asset. And finally, there are just many members of Congress in general that support Bitcoin. It's been a very hot topic on the House of Representatives floor, with Chair McHenry grilling Gary Gensler along with some of his colleagues about whether things like Ethereum are a security or a commodity. It's generally accepted that Bitcoin is a commodity, even though Chair Gensler won't even answer that simple question if Bitcoin is a commodity. He won't answer any question on crypto, really. He avoids them all. But there are many pro-legislators or pro-Bitcoin legislators. So in summary, I think this chart really says it all. If you look at it, look at the previous halving, look at the yellow line, see what happened after that, and know that that's what's happened every time we've had one of those yellow lines. And maybe it's to a lesser degree, maybe it's to a greater degree, but in general, that is what has happened every time we've had a yellow line. When is the next yellow line? Somewhere at the end of April 2024. So we have about 6 months to prepare. I would imagine in the next 6 months, at some point, there's going to be a big move down, and maybe there's a second big move down. I'm not really sure. But sometime between, I would say, February and May of 2024, you're going to want to be in. Again, not financial advice. I can't guarantee any outcomes, but there's never been a piece of data in the past that would prove that getting in around the halving is a bad idea. In fact, it's always been a magnificent idea. And I would encourage you to watch my previous videos again to look at other altcoins like Chainlink and Filecoin and some of the other gaming projects, Render Token, for ideas on when to invest, how to invest, and what potential returns are. If you're new here, please hit the subscribe button, the like button, leave me a comment, tell me whether you liked it, whether you hated it, just leave me a comment. I appreciate you coming out. I'll see you in the next video. Safe trading and have a great day.